I stood in the back row of my grandfather's funeral while my own family acted like I didn't exist. They looked right past me as if I were a complete stranger. I could hear quiet whispers every time I took a step. Some of my relatives glanced at me for a second before turning away. No one came over to say hello. No one offered a hug or even a simple word of kindness. That I believed the hardest part of that day would be saying goodbye to the only person who had ever made me feel loved. I had no idea that something even bigger was waiting for all of us before the day was over. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Marin Whitlock. I have always been a quiet person. I never liked arguments or family drama. I worked hard, stayed out of trouble, and tried to treat people with respect. The one person who always understood me was my grandfather, Gideon Whitlock. He never judged me. He always listened when I spoke, even when no one else cared what I had to say. Around him, I felt safe. As I stood inside the small church, I kept my eyes on Grandpa's casket. Fresh white flowers covered the front, and soft music filled the room. I wanted one peaceful moment to remember him, but my family made that impossible. My father, Blaine Whitlock, walked past me without saying a single word. He greeted other relatives with handshakes and hugs, but when he reached me, he acted as if I wasn't standing there. My Aunt Corinne looked at me with a cold expression before turning her back. My cousin Lennox laughed quietly with a few relatives and pointed in my direction. I didn't hear every word, but I knew I was the reason for their jokes. When everyone moved toward the front rows, they filled every seat together. They left no space for me. I didn't ask anyone to move. I simply stayed where I was, alone in the back. I wasn't there for them. I wasn't there to argue or prove anything. I had come for one reason only: to honor the man who had always treated me like I mattered. I folded my hands, took a slow breath, and looked at Grandpa's picture beside the flowers. Even through all the pain in that room, I silently thanked him for every moment of kindness he had given me during my life. Things had not always been this way, but I learned at a very young age that not everyone in a family chooses to love you. My mother passed away when I was 8 years old after a long illness. After she was gone, the house felt empty. I missed her every single day. Instead of helping me through that pain, some of my family treated me like I had become a problem they did not want to deal with. Whenever something went wrong, I seemed to be the one they blamed. If there was an argument in the house, someone would say I had caused it. If I forgot a small chore or made a simple mistake, they acted as if I had done something terrible. I was only a child, but I often felt like I had to apologize just for being there. As I got older, I stopped trying to defend myself. No matter what I said, no one listened. It was easier to stay quiet than to argue with people who had already made up their minds. The only person who never treated me that way was my grandfather, Gideon. Every Saturday morning, he would pick me up and take me to the town library. While other kids spent hours playing outside, Grandpa and I walked through rows of books together. He always told me that knowledge was something nobody could ever take away from me. He encouraged me to read about anything that interested me. If I asked questions, he answered them with patience. If he didn't know the answer, we searched for it together. Those days made me feel important. When I brought home good grades from school, Grandpa celebrated every report card. He didn't care if I was the smartest student. He was proud because I worked hard. He told me that success came from effort, not luck. He also wanted me to believe in myself. Whenever I doubted what I could do, he reminded me that my future belonged to me, not to people who wanted to hold me back. As I became older, he taught me simple life skills. He showed me how to manage money, fix small things around the house, and solve problems without depending on anyone else. He said real confidence came from learning to stand on your own feet. Those moments shaped the person I became. Even when life felt unfair, I remembered Grandpa's words. He never asked me to hate anyone. He only wanted me to keep moving forward and build a better life for myself. Looking back now, I realize he gave me something far greater than gifts or money. He gave me hope during the years when I had almost none, and that hope carried me through more difficult days than he could have ever imagined. As the years passed, Grandpa Gideon started slowing down. He was still sharp and kind, but age made everyday tasks harder for him. He walked more carefully, needed more rest, and no longer drove as often. That was when my father, Blaine, and my Aunt Corinne stepped in to help. At first, I thought they were doing the right thing. They said Grandpa needed someone to handle his bills, doctor's appointments, and paperwork. It sounded reasonable, so I didn't question it. But little by little, things began to change. Whenever I called Grandpa's house, someone else answered the phone. Most of the time it was Blaine or Corinne. They always had the same answer. He's sleeping. He's not feeling well today. The doctor says he needs complete rest. Every time I asked if I could visit, they found another reason to say no. They promised they would let Grandpa know I had called, but I never knew if they actually did. I started sending birthday cards and handwritten letters instead. Weeks passed without a reply. That wasn't like Grandpa. He had always answered my letters, even if it was only with a short note. I became worried. One Saturday, I drove to his house without telling anyone. I thought if I showed up with his favorite apple pie, maybe I could spend a few minutes with him. Before I could reach the front door, Blaine stepped outside and closed it behind him. He looked annoyed to see me. "You should have called first," he said. "I just wanted to see Grandpa. He had a rough night. He's exhausted. You need to stop dropping by." I offered to leave the pie with him, but he took it without inviting me inside. The door closed before I could say another word. As I walked back to my car, I looked at the living room window. For a second, I thought I saw the curtain move, but I couldn't tell if someone was standing there. After that day, I tried not to cause problems. If they said Grandpa needed rest, I told myself I should respect that. Still, something deep inside kept telling me that the story didn't feel right. I had no proof that anything was wrong. All I had were questions that nobody wanted to answer. Months turned into more than a year. The distance between Grandpa and me kept growing, even though I never stopped thinking about him. The hardest part was the guilt. Every night, I wondered if he believed I had stopped caring. I worried that he thought I had forgotten him or chosen to stay away. That thought hurt more than anything else, because I would never have walked away from the one person who had always stood by me. The service ended, and people slowly stood from their seats. Some wiped away tears while others walked toward the front to offer flowers and say their final goodbye. I waited until the crowd became smaller because I didn't want to get in anyone's way. I carried a single white rose in my hand. Grandpa had always loved white roses because they reminded him of the small garden behind his house. I gently placed the flower beside his casket and whispered, "Thank you for everything." It was the only goodbye I had left to give. As I turned around, I noticed the rest of the family gathering near the front entrance of the church. They were talking quietly among themselves. I walked toward them, thinking we would all leave together for the private family gathering after the funeral. Before I could reach them, Corinne stepped in front of me with her arms crossed. "The reception is only for close family," she said in a cold voice. For a moment, I thought I had heard her wrong. "I am family," I replied calmly. She gave me a small smile that didn't look friendly at all. "Today isn't the day to make a scene." Before I could answer, Lennox laughed under his breath and looked away. A few relatives standing nearby avoided looking at me. Not one person spoke up. Not one person said I should be there. Then Blaine walked over. He didn't ask what had happened. He simply looked at me and said, "You should just head home. Everything here is already taken care of." Those words hurt more than I expected. It felt like I had been pushed out of my own family without anyone saying it directly. For a few seconds, I thought about leaving. I could have walked away and never looked back. Instead, I took one slow breath and stayed silent. Grandpa had taught me that respect was shown through actions, not angry words. I wasn't going to argue in front of the church where we had just honored his life. Without saying anything else, I stepped away from the group. I stood alone near a large oak tree outside while everyone else talked, laughed softly, and made plans together. Cars began leaving one after another, and nobody asked if I needed a ride or even said goodbye. I watched them disappear down the road until the parking lot became quiet. The pain in my heart was heavy, but I refused to let their behavior change the reason I had come. This day belonged to Grandpa, not to the people who wanted me to feel unwanted. I looked back at the church one last time, thankful that I had been there to honor the man who had always believed I deserved a place, even when everyone else tried to convince me that I didn't. I had just reached my car when I heard someone calling from behind me. "Miss Whitlock." I turned around and saw a tall man in a dark gray suit walking toward me. He carried a leather briefcase and had a calm expression on his face. "I'm Sullivan Mercer," he said as he held out his hand. "I was your grandfather's attorney." I shook his hand, surprised that he knew who I was. "Mr. Mercer?" He gave a small nod. "Your grandfather left very clear instructions. Before anyone leaves today, every member of the immediate family must be present inside the church." I looked back toward the parking lot where several cars were already preparing to leave. "I don't think they'll want to stay," I said quietly. "They don't have a choice," he replied. These were Gideon's personal instructions, and I intend to follow them exactly. Without another word, Mr. Mercer walked across the parking lot and spoke with several relatives. Within a few minutes, people who had already climbed into their cars slowly returned to the church. Some looked confused, while others seemed annoyed by the delay. I followed everyone inside and quietly took a seat near the back once again. Mr. Mercer stood near the front beside the podium. He waited until the room became completely silent. "Thank you for remaining here," he began. "Before any discussions regarding Mr. Gideon Whitlock's estate can take place, I have been instructed to read a personal handwritten letter." The moment he mentioned the estate, I noticed several heads lift at once. Blaine leaned forward in his chair. Corinne folded her hands and watched the attorney closely. Even Lennox stopped whispering and paid attention. The sadness that had filled the church only minutes earlier seemed to disappear. The room now felt different. Everyone looked curious, almost impatient. Mr. Mercer reached into his briefcase and carefully removed a large sealed envelope. "The contents of this letter are to be read exactly as written," he said. Those were Mr. Whitlock's wishes. He held the envelope with both hands for a moment before breaking the seal. No one spoke. The church became so quiet that I could hear the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. I wasn't thinking about money or property. I simply wondered why Grandpa had written a letter instead of saying these things while he was alive. Mr. Mercer unfolded several handwritten pages and adjusted his glasses. He looked across the room one time before lowering his eyes to the paper. "I will now read Mr. Gideon Whitlock's final message exactly as he wrote it." Every person in the room fixed their eyes on him, waiting to hear Grandpa's last words. Mr. Mercer began reading the letter in a steady voice. "To my family, if you are hearing these words, it means I am gone. I hope you will listen carefully, because this is the truth I could no longer keep to myself." The room stayed completely silent. Then he continued. "For many years, I watched how Marin was treated. Some of you believed I didn't notice because I stayed quiet. You were wrong. I noticed every cold look, every cruel word, and every time she was made to feel like she didn't belong. I felt my heart beating faster. I couldn't believe what I was hearing." Mr. Mercer kept reading. "Marin, if you are here today, I need you to know something. You never failed me. You never stopped caring. I knew you tried to visit. I knew you called. I knew you wrote letters that never reached my hands." I slowly lowered my head as tears filled my eyes. For so long, I had believed Grandpa thought I had forgotten him. Hearing those words lifted a weight I had carried for years. The letter continued. "I also know that many lies were told in my name. People said I didn't want visitors. They claimed I asked to be left alone. Those words never came from me. A few people shifted nervously in their seats, but nobody interrupted." Mr. Mercer turned to the next page. "Because I feared this day would come, I began keeping careful records. I wrote down conversations, saved important papers, and documented every decision made about my finances and my home. I wanted the truth to survive, even if I did not." Several faces around the room lost their color. The attorney paused only long enough to turn another page. "Marin, I owe you an apology. I should have spoken sooner. I believed there would always be more time to make things right. I was wrong, and for that I am deeply sorry. I could no longer hold back my tears. Those simple words meant more to me than anyone in that room could understand." The final part of the letter was short but powerful. "To everyone gathered here today, there is one thing I want you to remember. Trust is earned through honesty, kindness, and loyalty. Marin showed me those qualities every day of her life. She was the family member I trusted most because her love never depended on what she could gain from me." When Mr. Mercer finished reading those words, he carefully folded the pages and looked up. No one spoke. The silence inside the church felt heavier than ever before. For the first time in many years, I knew Grandpa had understood everything, and no one could take that truth away from me. Mr. Mercer placed the letter down and opened a thick folder from his briefcase. The calm in the room did not last long. His next words changed everything. "Before we continue, I am required to present financial and legal documents that were reviewed and confirmed by Mr. Gideon Whitlock before his passing." He pulled out stacks of papers and laid them neatly on the podium. The first page showed bank transfers. Large amounts of money had been moved from Grandpa's accounts over the past years. The The second page showed property documents, including signatures that looked like Grandpa's but were marked with questions from the legal team. Blaine leaned forward immediately. "That's not possible," he said quickly. "Those decisions were made for his care." Mr. Mercer did not react. He simply turned another page. "These records show multiple withdrawals and transfers made without full authorization from the account holder during periods when Mr. Whitlock's condition was stable enough to sign his own legal statements." A low murmur spread through the church. Corinne shook her head. "This is a mistake. He agreed to everything," she said, but the attorney continued. "There are also records of property being listed and sold without the presence of the owner during final confirmation meetings." The room grew tense. People started looking at each other instead of the lawyer. A man from the back row whispered something to another relative. Then someone else responded sharply. Within seconds, quiet confusion turned into heated arguments. "That was your responsibility," one family member said. "You were handling the accounts," another snapped back. "No, you said he approved it." Voices overlapped. Accusations spread across the room like fire. People who had been sitting together now turned against each other without hesitation. Blaine stood up. "I handled what I was told to handle," he said loudly. Corinne was in charge of the paperwork. Corinne shot up from her seat. "Don't blame me for your decisions," she said. "You were the one meeting with the bank." The tension grew worse. Some relatives began arguing about signatures. Others questioned medical decisions that had been made on Grandpa's behalf. Even small details from the past were suddenly being dragged into the open. Through all of it, I stayed seated. No one looked at me anymore. No one tried to push me out or ignore me like before. Their attention was completely on each other now. I watched quietly as the people who once stood together started falling apart without needing any help from me. The noise in the room kept rising, but I stayed still. For the first time that day, I was not the center of their judgment. Instead, I was the only one left who was not trying to defend or hide anything. The truth in those documents had already done its work. The noise in the church slowly faded again as Mr. Mercer picked up another sealed envelope. This one was smaller, but it looked more important than anything else he had shown so far. "This document contains Mr. Gideon Whitlock's final instructions regarding his estate," he said. The room became quiet once more. Even the arguments stopped. Everyone waited, expecting their names to be called, expecting shares and promises to be read out. Mr. Mercer opened the envelope carefully and unfolded the document inside. "I will read this exactly as written," he said. He began. "To my family, I have made my decisions with a clear mind and full understanding. I leave my home and property located on Maple Ridge Drive to Maren Whitlock." A sharp sound filled the room. Like someone had dropped something. I froze where I sat. I could not even move for a moment. Mercer continued without pausing. "I also leave all personal savings and accounts under my name to Maren Whitlock, as she is the only one I trust to handle them responsibly." Whispers broke out immediately. People turned toward each other in shock, trying to understand what they had just heard. Blaine stood up halfway from his seat. "That is not what he wanted," he said quickly, but Mr. Mercer did not stop reading. "There are also personal journals and recorded notes documenting family actions, decisions, and events over the past several years. These are to be given to Maren Whitlock for her private possession." Corinne's face went pale. Lennox looked around the room as if searching for support, but no one met his eyes. Mercer turned another page. "In addition, I have arranged for several charitable donations to be made in the name of my late daughter, Maren's mother. These donations will continue yearly and are to be managed through a trust that cannot be changed or removed." The room reacted again. Some people spoke at once, but no one was listening to each other anymore. My hands were shaking slightly, but I kept them still in my lap. I could not believe what I was hearing. Everything Grandpa had built, everything he had worked for, was not going where anyone expected. Mercer reached the final line. "These decisions are final and legally binding. They reflect my full and final wishes." He lowered the paper. For a moment, there was complete silence again. This time, the silence felt different. It was not confusion anymore. It was realization. Everything they had assumed was gone in a single moment, replaced by something none of them were prepared for. And I was still sitting there, trying to understand that my name had been the only one chosen. After everything was read, people slowly left the church in silence. No one spoke to me. No one tried to explain anything anymore. They were too busy dealing with what had just happened among themselves. I stayed behind until the room was almost empty. Mr. Mercer waited near the front, as if he already knew I would need a moment. When I finally stood up, he walked toward me. "If you have questions about the documents, I will help you," he said gently. I nodded but did not say much. My mind felt full, but not in a painful way anymore. It felt like something heavy had finally been lifted. Outside, the air was cool and quiet. The parking lot that had been full earlier was almost empty now. I stood there for a moment, looking at the building where everything had changed. I did not feel the need to argue with anyone. I did not feel like chasing explanations or starting fights. Something inside me felt calm. Even after everything that had happened. In the days that followed, things began to move quickly. I was contacted by different people asking questions about accounts, property, and documents. I was told that some financial records were being reviewed more closely. It turned out that the information Grandpa had kept was clear enough for others to take action. There were formal investigations opened into how his finances had been handled over the years. I was not involved in starting them. I simply answered what I was asked and let things follow their course. Blaine and Corinne were no longer acting confident. Their names started appearing in legal notices and formal requests for explanation. I heard about it from Mr. Mercer, not from them. Still, I did not celebrate. I did not want revenge. I did not feel joy in watching everything fall apart. Instead, I focused on something else. Grandpa's home. The house on Maple Ridge Drive had always been peaceful when I visited as a child. After the legal process began, I was given access to it. When I first walked inside, it felt untouched, like time had stopped waiting for someone to return. I decided to take care of it myself. I cleaned each room slowly. I repaired what was broken. I organized his belongings and made sure nothing important was lost or thrown away. I did not change anything that mattered to him. Every step felt like I was bringing him back into a place he loved. I was not trying to erase the past or prove anything to anyone. I was simply following what he had trusted me with. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Months passed after everything settled, and life slowly became quieter in a way I had never experienced before. The constant tension that once followed every step was gone. There were no more arguments, no more sudden calls, and no more confusion about what was true or false. One afternoon, I stood on the front porch of Grandpa's house on Maple Ridge Drive. The sun was soft, and the air felt warm. I placed my hand on the wooden railing and looked out at the yard. Everything looked the same as I remembered, but I felt different inside. For a long time, I just stood there without moving. I thought about everything that had happened and how quickly life had changed. There were moments I still found hard to believe, not because they were painful, but because they felt so final. I walked inside the house and looked around slowly. Each room held memories I did not want to lose. The quiet sound of the floor under my steps reminded me of the times I used to sit with Grandpa and talk about small things that felt important back then. I sat down in his favorite chair for a while. It was the same place where he used to read or rest after long days. I closed my eyes and let the silence settle around me. In that silence, I understood something clearly for the first time. What I had received was not just property or papers. It was something deeper. It was the knowledge that someone had truly seen me, understood me, and believed in me even when others chose not to. That feeling stayed with me stronger than anything else. I also thought about how everything had unfolded. The truth that had been written down carefully had changed everything without me ever needing to raise my voice. I did not need to fight for attention or prove anything. Things had spoken for themselves in a way I never expected. The people who once ignored me were no longer part of my daily thoughts. I did not carry anger toward them anymore. That chapter felt distant, like something that belonged to another life. What mattered now was the peace I felt in this house and the meaning behind it. Standing again on the porch, I looked at the sky as it slowly turned golden. I realized something simple but powerful. The greatest gift I had received was not measured in money or things. It was the certainty that I was valued by someone who mattered deeply in my life. And that truth stayed with me, even when everything else had changed.